Amy Greason is the chair of our programs committee. And so all of these monthly programs that we're organizing are being done through the committee of which she is the chair. So say hi, Amy.
Hi.
Hi.
And you're doing a great job, Amy. Thank you.
Oh, Susan, you are so sweet. We've got the best committee in the world, and Barbara's just been hugely helpful. But anyway, welcome everyone. Pat, I am so excited about your program. I've been reading all about you, ordered your book, and should be arriving tomorrow. So I'm going to love just delving into it. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I hope most people have read the introduction that we sent out with the invitation to this program. And I would just like to introduce Pat Henry, who sailed around the world on her 31-foot sailboat. And I know she's got a fascinating presentation for us. So Pat, you have the floor. Over to you.
Thank you. Okay. Whoa. All right. I'm just getting adjusted to my screen here. I'm going to move all of you guys around a little bit so I can see better what I'm doing. Okay. You didn't know that, but okay, here we go. Okay. Welcome. August 2nd, 1988. I sold my house and bought Southern Cross, a 12-year-old Southern Cross 31 cutter rig sloop, and headed straight off to Svensson's boatyard in Alameda, California. And for 2 months, this is where we lived. I was on board, and every day I was down polishing, grinding, painting, sanding, whatever. And then 2 months later, in the beginning of October, we were back in the water and beginning our trip south from San Francisco Bay down to Mexico. And I had no radar, no radio, ham or single sideband, no refrigeration, no water maker. I did have one small solar panel, a sextant and tables for celestial navigation, photocopied charts to Australia, VHF radio with a 20-mile range, and a Sony receiver for Voice of America. And on passage, you might be interested, I carried 55 gallons of water, 5 months of food, fuel to go 600 miles, a used sat-nav, a used lifeboat, inflatable dinghy, old autopilot, and a dubious wind vane. Most important, I had 40,000 miles of blue water sailing experience, and 30,000 of that, I was a celestial navigator, most of it on multi-hulls. Without that, I don't think I would have undertaken this voyage. So May 4th, 1989, with $300 in my pocket and painting as I went to increase the amount of money in my pocket, we headed out on our way to Nukuhiva in the Marquesas Islands. And 3,200 miles, I expected to take 32 days, but it took 36 with the doldrums. And that can be very daunting if you thought ahead of you could visualize 3,200 miles with nothing between. But I looked at the horizon and I knew it was only 3 miles to the horizon. So I did the trip 3 miles at a time, one new horizon to another. On this first passageway down to Nukuhiva, some of the events on board, I had to dive over the side and go underneath to clean the knot log so we could know how fast we were going. The we, by the way, is Southern Cross and myself, nobody else. I had to go to the top of the mast, and the seas were anything but flat. The engine had an air leak in the fuel system. I finally jury-rigged and force-fed the engine from jerry cans. I had sciatica for 2 weeks, and you can heal it yourself, I learned. I also had the new radial head drifter. It's like a sort of specialized spinnaker. It's a modified kind of spinnaker, a little easier for one person to manage. And it wrapped in and out and all around the headstay. And I usually slept in the natural, and I raced out to the deck because this happened very early in the morning. And I was caught out there in the hot sun for 7 hours. And I found it very hard after that to sit or lie down using my back. So I arrived in New Cahiva, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I went, "You're a success." I didn't have to be the first one there. I didn't have to do it the best. And it was all right if I ran the engine now and then. And it was a big breakthrough for me because part of the reason that I headed out on this trip was recovering from a business failure. And to be able to look at myself and say, "You're a success." It was totally, totally amazing and a real breakthrough for me. So I arrived in Tahiti, one of the most expensive places around, with $3. It's right there. I had $3 to my name that day. And you don't go far in Tahiti with $3. Another friend artist was just arriving also. And we got in my dinghy and headed to shore. And the first dollar we each spent was for a bus to go to town. And we were at the Tahiti market down here, beautiful market. And this lady looked at us and she raced over and she said, "Who are you? What are you doing here? And how did you get here?" I don't know why she asked us that, but she did. And we told her our stories. And she said, "Oh," and she bought a painting for me and she bought earrings from my friend and we went out to dinner. What else would you do when you just got however much money she gave us? And so that's what we did in Tahiti. I stayed for 2 months and I painted on the streets. I had a little chair that I sat in and I got some commissions. And so I was able to leave 2 months later with a little money in my pocket. Money is an issue for this whole trip, obviously, leaving with $300 in the whole world. And so it was, some people say they found that part more scary than the storms. But anyway, I headed out to Moorea, Huahine, Bora Bora for more photos and sketches. My visa was up November 1 because that was the beginning of hurricane season. And so I had to get on my way quickly. But the weather kept getting worse and worse in Bora Bora. Finally, I couldn't wait any longer. I took off, and the first of my 2 biggest storms happened in that passage. So first storm is right here, and the second storm is down here. In both of those, I had winds up to 60 knots, and that's the bottom line on hurricanes. So it was officially within the hurricane range, and my seas were 28 to 25 feet tall. That's a lot on a 31-foot boat. So they took days to get over, by the way. It wasn't something that happened quickly. All of my storm experience on the big boats I'd been on was going downwind. So I really didn't have the gear on board to do anything else, which would have been maybe a more normal response. So all of that was done in heavy seas and heavy winds. So I was on my way to New Zealand at this point. And I was in a bit of a hurry because my sister was coming and she was bringing me a ham radio. I said to my family, "If you buy the radio, I'll get the license." And they wanted very badly to be able to check in and know how I was doing. And so I was trying to hurry up to get to see her as well as get the radio. And my sister Liv and I took a little trip. Here we are, we're in New Zealand. We went down to Auckland. And in Auckland, I didn't have much luck selling anything. I was there with a round the world crowd. There was a big round the world race there. And that was disappointing because I was looking forward to that. And by the time I left from Auckland, Liv had flown out and I was heading back. I was down to $2, no coffee, no butter, and a whole lot of other food items. And I got up to Tutakaka where I was going to spend the night. And I seriously looked at the back of the boat and contemplated maybe this is the end of it. You know, I don't think if I can make money, if I can't make money, I'm not going to be able to do this trip. And something tapped me on the shoulder, and it was the most gorgeous sunset you can imagine. And I went, wow, if I'd done that, I wouldn't have seen that sunset. And it was enough at that time. When I got up to the Bay of Islands, where I was going to live for the next 15 months, there were envelopes and envelopes at the post office, and many of them with money in it. You know, somebody would send me $200, another person $100, order for a painting, and there was even a wheelbarrow full of free cabbages sitting out. And so I went, well, I'm awfully glad I didn't do that foolish thing, because look at this, it's all waiting for me for the rest of the trip. Anytime it was getting close to the edge, I'd remind myself, you don't know what's around the corner. So I'm there, I got the license, and I was going to have to leave for 2 months and make a side trip to Tonga for permission for the boat to stay longer in New Zealand. So we're controlled by weather, we're controlled by governments, many factors that say when we can sail and when we can't and when we should and shouldn't.
WMT app, but it's not free to make. We've got to keep the lights on. We've got to replace bad cables. We've got to keep the piano tuned, and of course, pay all the great talent in front of the microphone and behind the scenes as well. That's what your money goes towards.
I think we can mute him.
Thank you.
The leader of the call can mute that person.
Hey, this is a mini hand.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so anyway, there was a gallery in town, and everyone said, well, in the wintertime that the artist that has that gallery leaves town, and he usually hires somebody. And I kept thinking about it, and finally, one day I thought, I'm going to walk in and talk to him. I opened the door, and we'd never met, and he turned to me and he said, would you like to run my gallery while I'm going away? And I thought, wow, this guy's a mind reader. Well, anyway, I said yes right away. So as soon as I got back from the Tonga trip, I went in and he gave me the key, gave me all the instructions, and I was set. I had a window seat with where I painted, and people came in and ordered paintings, and all those photos that I had taken along the way, I was turning into paintings. So it was an excellent stop for me. And from there, I took off to go see the other islands. But before I did, Dale across the street in the Blue Penguin took over the business I was doing with the artist. And we had a business arrangement. All the time I was sailing, I'd get in someplace and there would be an envelope from Dale. And she became, of course, a very close friend. She joined me in Fiji and in Australia. So now we move along and we're on our way to Singapore. That trip started at the Bay of Islands as we left. So I said farewell to friends from 15 months in New Zealand and passed by Tonga, Fiji, Vanuatu, and Noumea. I was stopping and getting photos and still painting and seeing the sights. And then I went on in Noumea to set up a show for the following June. So I had something to come back to after Australia. I arrived in Australia at Christmas in Brisbane, Christmas '91, the most beautiful city anchorage of any place in the world. This is where all of our boats were. I was right there. That's the botanical garden. That was our front porch or front yard. And all of the city was right here. And of all the places in the world, they gave us free showers and free laundry facilities, which was, both of those things were important on a small boat especially. So beautiful city, but they had also the most officious officials. When they came to check me in, they said, you will not do any work while you're in Australia. And I had told them just to reassure them that I was you know, somebody they could depend on not to become a ward of the state, that I was getting ready for a show in Noumea. And so he says to me, and no paintings for your show in Noumea. It was so bad. The boat next to me, they were pregnant when they came in. They had the baby in Australia, and his birth certificate said illegal immigrant. So May came and I left for Noumea. But when I got there was nothing ready for the show. My yachty friend said, we'll make it happen. You become a really big family out there as you go from place to place. They said, just relax. So I had 2 equipment failures right around this time. One on the way in, right here. I had a split backstay, that's normal, but the bottom left-hand side became detached, it broke. And I had to scavenge parts from something else on the boat, but I got it back together and went on in. And then on the way after that, right here, the boom broke. And if you're not a sailor, you may not know that's the big thing at the bottom of the mainsail. And yeah, I was in heavy seas going downwind, and I had an accidental jibe. And this is what I was left with, 2 parts of the boom. And that's my at sea solution. I found some spare parts in the bilge, and I cut those and drilled and tapped and screwed them in. And that's my broom handle. I cut it in a couple pieces and inserted that. And then I put a fiberglass bandage over it all. So I couldn't use the mainsail because of all of this work going on. But I could do what's called wing and wing. It's two big sails in front, and you hold them out with a pole or whatever. And the boom became a pole on one side. So I was on my way to get to Darwin for my next leg. And all of this work went on in very lumpy seas. So I got to Darwin on time. Dale was sitting there with money for me and a visit, which was really welcome, the money and the visit. And then I left for Bali, and there was no wind at all. We all just crept along. And finally, at about this point, we got wind again, but all that sailing wasn't sailing, really. I mean, the sails were up, but there wasn't any wind to blow them. I could watch jellyfish and sea snakes go by. So Bali, my dream was that I would walk through the rice paddies to little villages and ask if I could spend the night. Well, there was no time left. By the time I got through all the things that got in the way, my 2-month visa was almost up. And so I was very disappointed to have to leave without being able to do that. And I went on to the next leg, which is taking me from Bali to Singapore. And this was very difficult sailing. Primarily, this first part, it was fish traps. And the second part, it was big, big ships. It was like being in the middle of a huge LA interchange. The ships were crossing on all sides of me. I could not find out where their waypoints are. With that information, I could plot their courses on my chart and go out of the way and not have an encounter. Well, all I could do, I couldn't sleep more than 15 minutes at a time for that whole passage. And I just 15 minutes with the in the cockpit on the seat, which was not comfortable. Thank goodness I would have slept longer. And I had a kitchen timer on my chest. So every 15 minutes I got up to check for ships or weather change or whatever. Anyway, I finally got all the way up to Singapore. And to be able to go in and anchor, I had to cross the lanes of traffic that go around the south end of Singapore. They're huge because those ultra large cargo carriers are enormous, and they have to pass comfortably through there. And, you know, I got across that. Now comes the hard part. It's midnight. It's an absolutely black night. I can't see anything. And as you remember, I don't have radar. And so I'm going up this channel. In the far distance, I could see little bright red lights on the coast of Malaysia ahead. I couldn't see anything moving on the Singapore side. So I get to Ferry Point, make the left-hand turn. I find all the yachts. I can see their silhouettes against the city lights. And with those, I said, oh, thank God I'm here. I was so relieved. And I raced out to prepare the anchor so I could drop it when I got back into the middle of the other boats. And when I turned back around, I looked straight up above my boat, and there were red and white lights. And I could not see a vessel. And had the ice water in the knees. There's no better way to describe how that felt. And I raced back to that cockpit, jumped in, undid everything I had in hold there. We were both, whatever was there and myself, had 6 knots of current. And I turned quickly to the left. I never felt or saw anything, but it was obviously there. I didn't have time to watch while I was getting out of the way and getting into the anchorage. The next morning, having coffee, this went by, several of those. Here's the tugboat out here, and there's the barge. And if that was what was behind me, and I'm assuming it was, because that, I'm sure they had some kind of lights out at that end with that height. And I felt I had just escaped my closest brush with death that I ever felt on the whole trip, because this tugboat could never have stopped, and he couldn't have turned. He would have been run over by the barge. So he had no choice but to keep going. And I didn't have a choice, didn't have anywhere else to go. So Singapore became a wonderful stop. I was there 13 months, had many friends, went to the symphony every week. My first friend was the lady that sold the tickets to the symphony. And I met Dawn, who owned a gallery up in one of the high-rise shopping centers. And she became a friend, and we established ongoing business. Well, before that happened, I had reached a real low point, and I went up to her and I said, I've got some paintings I think you would like. And she took a look, and yes. And I said, the problem is I don't have any money to pay for the prints. If you'll give me money for the prints now, I'll bring you the prints when they come in. And she says, no, I'll write you a check today for 10 prints of each of those paintings, and I'm buying the originals. So that set me up for Singapore stop. And friends organized an exhibition at the American Club, and that was a $10,000 night. And I'm feeling pretty good, but I still have to leave. I also got a sponsor, Profurl. I've been trying for sponsorship with no luck. And Profurl is something for the bow of the boat that it carries a sail on it. You can unroll it from the cockpit. I didn't have anything I could do from the cockpit. So anyway, he said, you know, I get those requests and I always say no. But he said, my 50 plus wife said, if I didn't do this, that she threatened various unmentionable things. I never found out what they were. He asked for my address, and we were all happy. And that Profurl was wonderful. So I'm ready to go again, and I have to check out. And I went to see the office where you do that. And when you come in, people on boats are allowed 2 weeks. They get 1 more week, and then that's pretty much it. And he looked at my passport and he goes, oh, he says, well, you came in November or October, you're leaving in November. Oh, that's fine. And he looked again. Wait a minute. He says, that's 13 months ago. How did you do that? And I just smiled and shrugged my shoulders. And he said, you have till midnight tomorrow night. Be gone. Okay, so I was too late for a convoy once again, and I really wanted one for the Malacca Straits. There they are. They have been notorious for piracy for hundreds of years, and I didn't want to be going up alone. while the big ships are their, their biggest target, I was very, very nervous about it. And so anyway, I couldn't figure out how you knew a pirate boat. And at one point in there, I thought there were 3 times that possibly I was being approached by pirates, but this one was interesting. It was that small power yacht coming up behind me, but not speeding up, holding his speed. And I thought, that's very suspicious kind of movement. So I wasn't quite sure how to handle that. Finally, I got on the radio in a really deep voice, as strong as I could do. I said, please identify yourselves and tell me what your intentions are. Oh, said this little voice, this is whatever the boat name was. We thought you were our friend Saracen. Oh, we're so sorry. I said, well, thank you. I thought you were a pirate. And they sped up and they passed me and all was fine. So I still don't know how you know a pirate boat when you see one. Anyway, I went on across the Indian Ocean here. Well, all of this. I went to Phuket for a haul out, very, very expensive haul out where my sister came. And then I left on this passage and the autopilot gave out again. Right here, it was one little gear and they made it out of plastic. So it kept wearing out. And I thought they really should have just given me a new autopilot. All this part of the thing, no autopilot, and I certainly didn't have fuel to go that far. And I was making good use of it to do concept studies for a new house for friends I met in Singapore. They were building in Tahoe. And I was kind of steering with my big toe on the tiller. That was a slow passage. I thought it was going to be like 21 days, and it was 28. And as I got close, a friend called from Aden. He said, I've got the dinghy in the water. I want to take you in to check in. I want to watch the face on the port captain because he's going to be surprised when it's one woman and she's by herself. Well, he was. And that happened all the way up through the Red Sea. Every place I got different kinds of responses to have arrived alone. And in Aden, all of us came out with this black necklace around the bottoms of our boats. That's tar. There was tar floating. You couldn't really see it. It was so finely dispersed. But the next little stop, everyone went in. We called it Cleanup Harbor. And we spent, I don't know how long, scraping and getting this mess off the bottom of the boat. Well, while we were there, we were also talking and sharing information about the Red Sea. It's a very challenging sail. And the later you get in the season, the worse it is because there's a barrier where the wind coming from the south, that line starts dropping back and you've got more headwinds the higher up you go. So the advice was that someone had received, be ready for 2 months for the trip. And for that length of ocean, that was not very far to go in 2 months. And be ready to leave at 5 a.m. in the morning and be ready to stop at 2 p.m. in the afternoon if the winds feel like they're going up. And if it isn't good, stay put. There was a guy along that shore there somewhere that had been there for 2 months, staying put. And I didn't have 2 months. I didn't want to spend it sitting there for 2 months. But anyway, this side you couldn't go up. Northern Yemen wasn't available. For Saudi Arabia, if you have an emergency, you can go in, they'll take care of your emergency fuel and water. That's it. A woman, I couldn't have stepped off the boat. So, and then the left side, Eritrea had just 2 years before begun welcoming sailing boats, or just the year before, I think. I was in the second wave, and I definitely wanted to go to Eritrea. Sudan, they said, for Americans, don't go up that. And of course, there were things happening for tourists in Egypt and gunboats around the borders. So you had to be really careful about where you planned. And I did stop everywhere I wanted to. In Eritrea, the city looked nothing like Aden. It had only been 3 years, but you didn't, in the town where we landed, you didn't see the evidence. In Aden, it looked like the kids were playing in bombed out buildings, and there were no flowers. And in Matsawa, there were flowers growing. This little old lady came out with a tray with little cups of coffee, said, please help us celebrate. It was just night and day in difference. And we made a bus trip up to the capital, Asmara, in the mountains, and these were our bus companions. I mean, the fact of all the people that I would had the opportunity to meet and the cultures to experience, it was absolutely wonderful. So in Sudan, it's true that the harbor captain came out and he climbed on my boat. He was a great big guy, and he climbed on my boat. He said, you're alone? And I said, yes. Well, he said, we would be shamed. And the men of Sudan would be shamed if one of their women had to go off alone. And I was kind of mystified. I said, what if she wanted to go alone? Oh, he couldn't even conceive that that would be possible. So that was that stop. And on up into Egypt, and they varied along the way. But none of them were like, oh, hi. It was always a surprise. So through the Suez Canal and exiting out into the Mediterranean was just this huge breath of fresh air. The colors got brighter, the sky got clear, and it just felt great. And I got shoehorned in here at Cyprus at the dock. There was about 4 inches between each boat, just enough anyway to get some protection down. And while I was walking through the streets in Cyprus, I hear behind me, where are you from? And without even looking back, I said, where are you from? And he says, Egypt. And I said, yes, I knew that. I wasn't hearing all of that sort of come on kind of thing that I had all over Egypt. So that was kind of very welcome. I went on across from Cyprus and touched down in Turkey, and sailed that coast, and it was exquisite. Beautiful turquoise water, and all along the coastline up on the hillsides and such were old castles and walled cities and ancient ruins, and it was brilliant. So on to the next leg. And we're now on our way to the Caribbean. But this started in Marmaris, and I was going through the Greek islands first and through the Med. And I stayed here in Rhodes for a while on the first part, and my family came and we went back to Turkey, and then I went back to Rhodes again. Where will I stay this winter? And it wasn't going to be Rhodes. It was too expensive and no services. So I spent the whole winter in Marmaris. And then I sailed back in June to Lindos again, down here on the coast, where Sheila was opening her new laundry and library and had offered a place for me to have a show. So my friends all came over for the show, and they ended up installing washing machines and cleaning and hanging the show and putting books on the shelves. And again, that sailing family jumps in where they're needed. And I left after that to go through the islands. You can see my little path. And I was again collecting photos and enjoying the culture. Simi is the first stop after Rhodes. And here were some of the photos that I was taking. And this is the harbor. And I went on from there. I stopped in Astapalia, where this picture came from. And I just want you to see that blue sky all over. It doesn't show up in this painting, but it shows up in this photo too. That is the deep blue sky of Greece. And when I painted it, it looked impossible. And I'd hold the painting up and it was exactly a match. So that's that one. And I love this monastery. It looked like it had been painted on the side. That's from Amorgos. And I stopped in many, many places and carried on. My goal was the Corinth Canal. That canal, they tried to do it way back, BC. and they didn't get very far. That's all solid rock, but it was important enough, rather than making people sail all the way around the Peloponnesus to get from here to there, they determined to do it, and it was the end of the 1800s when they finished. It's about the most expensive water you pay to go through, but I just tell you about the experience of going through it. When you come up, you see cars driving right at water level, and it's really strange. You wonder how in the world that's going to work. And then all of a sudden the cars all disappear and the bridge goes under the water. It goes down and there's 20 feet clear on top of that. So boats not greater than 20 feet, probably a lot less, will be able to go through. It's only as wide as twice Southern Cross length. So it's not very wide in there. And I had a big ocean-going tug that wanted to pass. And I was just holding my breath while he went by. Anyway, up the other side and through this, I think that's the Corinth Canal, or not canal, but anyway, that body of water. Out to the other side, and I'm leaving Greece. And it was beautiful to look at, but the men weren't much better than Egypt had been, I have to say. Okay. And so now we're still on the way to the Caribbean, but we've moved out into the Mediterranean, mostly here. And I crossed over and brief stops in Italy, Sicily, Malta, Sardinia, and then in Spain, where again, I'm hauling out my boat. You had to do that pretty often for keeping the bottom clean so you can, have good sailing and not have problems on the bottom. And it turned out that haul out was less than 25% the cost of the one that I did in Thailand. And they had every facility right outside the gate. Was a big supermarket. There was everything you could need. And when I was hauled out, the first thing you do is you begin to scrape the bottom clean before you can paint it and do all that work. And one of the employees at the boatyard saw me, and he got his son, and he came back after work and he said, "We're going to help you. You're by yourself." Well, that was not going to happen in Thailand. Anyway, it was a great experience. And I carried on down here to Gibraltar. All down this last part, I was looking for a welder who could weld the supports for my spreaders right up here, right there. There were cracks in them I had discovered, and no place along there had a stainless steel welder. And there I am now. I'm in Gibraltar. I'm up the mast, taking off these supports to get them to the welder. And this was not a calm, flat water place at all. It was very rough. So the masts were sort of crossing each other almost as the swell went through. Well, another guy looked up and he couldn't stand it anymore. He climbed up the mast to help me. So I spent 6 hours up there trying to do that work. And then we got them down. He got them down. And I took them to the welder, got them back, and I put them back in. So I'm on my way out of Gibraltar and heading to the Canary Islands. And I spent a month there relaxing, having a little bit of a romance, and carried on. I had advice from, now I could get, because I had this radio and I had a little special surgery on it so that I could talk on the bin that I wasn't supposed to be talking on. And he told me, you must get going right now because there's a big system coming down behind you. And I got out just in time. 2 days later, the big system came through and the boat next to me in the Canaries wound up on the rocks, totally demolished. So it was a much bigger boat than mine. And that was very sad. So here's the gale as it's coming through. I didn't have a problem. I could just almost let the boat sort of self-steer it on the way down. And this is the area in here where I found my antipodal point. I don't think I mentioned antipodal, but to do a true circumnavigation, you have to go through 2 points that are precisely across all the way on the opposite side of the world through. Otherwise, it isn't a genuine circumnavigation. And I didn't get concerned until all of a sudden I realized that the way I was going, there was only going to be land, except this one area in here where I could hit that antipodal point. Anyway, I went on across, autopilot dies again. And that was a new one. And they had said in their promotion, this autopilot is guaranteed to not leak. And it did. It shouldn't have. And across and across over to Barbados. And from Barbados, I crossed and I went through the Lourdes up this way to St. Martin to do some, I did photo work all along here wherever I stopped. And then I took off and headed back down. I was looking at Grenada as my place to stop for the hurricane season. You had to be south of Grenada. And no, you could be above it, I'm sorry. Yeah, south of the top line of Grenada. But it was too expensive and there was no opportunity for me to make any money. So I continued on down to Venezuela, right here. And what amazing, wonderful luck I had there. I was invited to be the guest right here at Puerto La Cruz in the Bahia Redonda Marina. Went to ask if I could have a show there. And Peter York, the manager, said, absolutely you can. And he said, well, just you can come in and get water or go to the market, whatever you need to do. Just come in anytime. Don't have to be in a hurry to leave. And I've got an apartment that's just about finished. And you can use that to do your paintings. So make a studio out of it. I'll get you the key. My life changed for sure. I was there for 5 months and preparing for the show and then preparing for the next leg. And that was to sail home. And so here I am. I had to go through the Suez Canal. And to do that, well, first I had to get there. I had to go all across here, this part, to get to the canal. And this was a worrisome place, but I went through it fine. Friends told me it was their worst, most difficult, challenging sailing of their whole circumnavigation. So anyway, I'm going to go through the Panama Canal, and you had to have 4 line handlers. I wanted all women. I think this was from the down trip, not the up trip. But here are my 4 women. And when the pilots came to escort me through, this is the first departure to go through. Here I am. And they didn't think that this crew and myself were going to be up to the job. But we found a way beautifully to do it. And so they're on board here to handle the lines, all 4 lines. And then he says, no, you're not going through center chamber. You're going to go through with that ocean-going tug. So I was tied up to a tugboat, and we were behind this big boat ship. And the hard part is that when you're inside, you're not that far away, and she's going to kick into gear, and you get the wash from it. So that's the way it happened. We go up two locks, and you come out on a lake, and we had to motor across the lake to the other side, and then you go down. And when you go down, the big boat ship is behind, and the little guy like me is in front. And they were literally looking off the bow, like, no, we're still getting together in this thing. They're looking down on me, and they're just amazed because there's more women all over my boat, including a videographer for a TV show. And so we went down one lock. There was no videographer then. I stayed at a place there, reminded me of my old church camp when I was a kid. I had a show lined up at a military base, in the middle between the two, the up and down locks. And then that's when the people came and they interviewed me for the television show. And they said, we want to go with you. Well, the line handlers, two new pilots were on board, and myself, and they're all in the cockpit. And the pilots looked down, the young ones again, and they said, there's water in here. I think something's wrong. And I said, well, if some of you would just go forward, I think the boat will get balanced again and we'll be all right. They saw themselves sinking to the bottom before we even got to the lock. Anyways, through the second lock of the down part, and I was back on the Pacific side again after all those years. And I took off and heading up the West Coast. All the books said, don't stop. They called this the forgotten middle. They said, don't stop El Salvador, don't stop in Guatemala, don't stop in Nicaragua. And I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to deal with all the heavy seas. So I made little stops all over and spent the night in all these countries, maybe more than one night. And I had a wonderful reception. Everything went fine. When I got to El Salvador, this was very interesting. I went up in Gulf of Fonseca right here, and I had to go in and I wanted to call my family. And, the warning was that you're not going to be welcome there. So I was in town at the telephone company, and this tiny little woman, we were eye to eye. She could look straight in my eyes. That's how short she was. Excuse me. Just a second. And she took my face in her hands, and she absolutely shot pure love straight into my eyes. And I was so shocked because I realized that what the United States participated in, she probably lost family members. I'm sure she experienced some pretty horrible things, and yet she could give that to me. It was a real eye-opener. I was so touched. I can't get that woman's face out of my mind. So, pardon me. And the port captain was really cute. He said, I've given you 90 days. And I said, well, thank you. Can you tell me where to find a laundry? He said, no, I'll take your clothes. I'll wash them myself. So El Salvador had a great welcoming to me. I went on across. I got to the Gulf of Tehuantepec, the last of the really dangerous places. They tell you go 500 miles offshore, 500 feet off the beach, and nothing in between, because you can get caught up in super high seas within 2 miles of the shore because of this. It's very narrow. Pardon me. So we went in a convoy of 4 boats, and it went perfectly. The timing was excellent. All the shrimp boats had already left, and off we were. And I continued on up. I had a big lightning storm, and I've always been nervous about lightning. I'm the tallest thing around. There were no other masts or anything. And from all the way across the horizon on shore was lightning. But when it got to me and I looked up, there was a circle of totally clean air above me, and I could see stars sparkling above. Lightning ahead, lightning behind, lightning on the outside. It was an incredible experience. And I came in here in Acapulco. May 4th, I anchored in a bay, and May 5th, I crossed my outgoing line, and I went in. I called the marina before. I'd called them, and they said, we'll give you a free week. And when I walked in the office, they handed me those flowers. It was too big to go inside the boat. It was a gift from the staff at the marina. And I I saw some people on the terrace. I took a little bottle of champagne and 4 plastic cups. And I said, would you like to help me celebrate? I just finished sailing around the world. And they couldn't believe it. They said, oh my gosh, sit down. What can, And that night, a friend drove down from Mexico City and took me out to dinner. There was no welcoming crowd. All the people that thought they'd be there waiting for me, it was too last minute. They couldn't make it. And it was quite an experience. And I had tons of faxes and then lots of phone calls. And I was home. And I left there and picked Puerto Vallarta for my home. I've been there ever since, 28 years. I didn't dream I would. I thought I'd be going around again. And I didn't do that. I found a nice place to live. Here's Southern Cross. She looks a lot different than that first haul out. And she just got a new bottom paint job. This is me for my book cover, a little windblown, and looks like I've got my fall weather gear on. I put the boat and myself in this little development right by the harbor, and each house had its own dock. So that's where I lived for a while. And I got some mentions and awards and such. And I've had a great life. And I thank you for coming aboard for this little trip. And maybe you have questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Pat. That was just a wonderful talk about your circumnavigation. I appreciate it so much. I know we all do. And now I would like to open the floor for questions and discussion. But I will let you, if you can recognize people, Pat, that would be easier for me.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
I'll do my best.
Can people use their, can you use Zoom
Just
to
raise
raise
your
your
hand.
hands?
Or whatever.
If you can't, if there is a button called React, and under React, there is a way to raise your hand. Otherwise, I guess we'll go with the physically raised hand.
Okay.
Amy.
I don't see. Oh, okay.
You got Amy first. Amy has got her hand up.
Oh, I can't see anybody. I only.
I can, so I can tell you.
Oh, thank
Amy
you.
Gleason wants to talk to us.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah.
Pat, loved your presentation. Just curious, were you writing, were you processing all of your book at this time, or and that's one, and then the second, how did you deal with the alone time so much? Did you yeah, those would be the two questions I had.
Okay. I never considered writing a book ever. So I had my log and I wrote copious letters. Being alone out there, this kind of ties in. If I wrote a letter to somebody, it was almost like they were sitting across from me and I was chatting with them. So my mother and my brother both saved all the letters I wrote. Maybe other people did too. I don't know, but they did. That's all. I had all my guides and all my plotting sheets. I made notes on my plotting sheets. When you're doing celestial navigation, you can't really do it on the charts. They become a mess. So you do it on separate plotting sheets. And I was always drawing little drawings and whatever, making comments. So I had those. And the only time I actually felt lonely on this trip was really at an art show that somebody took me to in Cyprus. And they dropped me off. They had something else and they said, there's an art show in town. And if you'd like to go, I'll drop you off. And 500 people there, and nobody even noticed me and nobody said hi. And I was more alone than I've ever been anywhere, to not have any contact. Being alone out at sea, I always had things to do, letters to write, books to read. And at the end, somebody wanted to write my book. He was he had written, he like wrote books for sports people rather than they write their own, he did. And he had 2 New York Times bestsellers. And I read them, and he wrote a beautiful piece for me, a 6-page piece for the Chicago Tribune Sunday magazine. And it was really nice, but it wasn't, they sounded alike. He had his voice. And I went, no, I really want to write my own book and have it in my voice. So my mother thought all I had to do was take those letters and they would make the book. I said, well, this isn't going to quite work, Mom. And I absolutely loved the writing. It took 4.5 years to gather all my notes and go through and find everything that I wanted to talk about and learn how to write. I wasn't a writer, so I took it very seriously. I wrote every morning, practice like you would if you were a runner and you were going to do a race. So I was more lonely than anywhere out at sea going through the Mediterranean, because I was used to having a cruising community around me. And we were few and far between. And so the crowd that was chartering would whip in, tie off, brush themselves up and go out to dinner. And it was none of, oh, stop over for coffee, or the things that we would do for each other. So thank you.
There's Diane Brizzi, who's next. Diane, want to start, please?
She's muted.
Okay, we can't see her anyway. So.
Oh, yeah, but her hand is up. Diane, can you unmute yourself? I don't know. Nancy Lewis.
There it is.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say, Pat, that I connected with you in so many ways. I loved your story. I'm a fellow artist, and I have I have 2 questions, one about art and one about your journey, technical aspect. For your paintings look like they're watercolors.
They are.
How did you keep them safe in the humidity and being on the water?
Well, my boat was actually not as humid as most boats.
Yeah.
Most boats, when you go on board, there's an odor, and there never was. My hull was Eric's cord, and I think that's part of why it was as dry inside. There were a few times that I wound up with water inside, and I did my best to keep them safe. That was a pretty paramount thing beyond the electronics. That was major to keep that dry.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And I was just going to say it would have been too messy to take acrylics or oils or whatever, because these were dry.
Yes. Weren't you brave to take the watercolors?
I hadn't planned on, I was never an artist before the trip.
Oh.
I was an architect, and in architecture, you get a certain number of art classes. And
wow.
Yeah. Anyway.
I wouldn't have guessed. They're beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I had fun. I love doing watercolors.
Usually I take pictures, and when I get home, I do my oil paintings.
Yes. Well, home was 8 years away.
My second question is you alluded to something that if you didn't take a certain route, technically correct, it wouldn't be considered a circumnavigation. Could you explain that to someone who is not a sailor?
Well, if you went right through the center of the earth with something, okay, the 2 ends of that on the surface of the earth, somewhere in my circumnavigation, I had to pass through 2 points exactly opposite each other.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
and that's
I understand.
Yeah, right. Well, otherwise somebody could go around, at the South Pole, just stay at the bottom, and they would not have gone as far. There are different numbers come up as to what that distance is. But if you go up and down like I did, you're not going in a straight line. So, and then I've included all my solo sailing when I say 40,000 miles.
Oh,
As I came down the coast, that wasn't part of the around the world part.
What a wonderful story. I so enjoyed traveling with you today.
Thank you. I had 100 more stories and I wish I could have told them all. They
Another
were
time.
all about amazing people that I met and things that happened. It was a delight to share the ones I could.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane.
Nancy Lewis next.
Yes.
Aloha.
I-
Incredible journey you had, and you wove your story beautifully. I could feel the waves.
Oh,
And
thank you.
to know that I made a small, less long voyage
Okay.
at West Sail 32 that we built, not from a
All right. All right. Fantastic.
with our at the time 6-year-old. As I was doing dissertation research in the Pacific, we landed in Hiva-Oa from San Francisco after 30 days. We built the boat at the boatyard in the Alameda Marina.
Oh, my heavens.
We left from the Alameda Marina too on
Oh,
a half-year journey. And so I just felt I really resonated with you. So thank you so much.
well, thank you. And thank you for sharing yours. I can't imagine doing it with a youngster on board or a husband.
The youngster I'm still related to. The husband, well,
Okay, didn't have anything to do with the voyage, of course. I'm just teasing.
he was and a real boatsman, as you might guess. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next
Oh,
is
thank you, Pat. This has just been wonderful. I want to thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. And I will add my little coda here, which is that I do expect to complete my circumnavigation this summer. So,
Bravo. Absolutely.
but I will be looking for those antipodal points to make sure I've actually done it. I believe I have.
Okay. Yeah, it's surprising how hard it can be. And I didn't take it seriously in the beginning, and then it was, challenging.
Well,
Okay.
my definition was to have crossed all of the lines of longitude. But I take your point that unless you have this antipodal connection or contrast, you can go through all the lines of longitude, even going around the Antarctica practically.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, what a wonderful, wonderful explanation and tale that you've led us on today. And I would just like to thank you so much. And we will look forward to having this presentation up on the YouTube channel so that everyone else can appreciate it also. Thank you again, Pat.
Thank you. It was great fun.
Hey,
Good night, everyone.
hey, I'm sorry.